Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 19th September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. The sun is shining in Plymouth, England, which is always a good start, but we're going overseas.
Well, we're going to go straight into the Rohingya crisis, and of course, what we're seeing throughout the mainstream media, a lot of emotive images and so on. We need to get to the bottom of this now. The situation hitting the headlines over the last few weeks, and what's interested me about this, Brian, has been the sort of one-sided reporting, the sudden media and political attacks on, well, Britain's darling of the Far East, Aung San Suu Kyi, and I'm wondering why. Could it be that she's gone off script? Of course, she's not at the UN General Assembly this week, but there are Burmese representatives there, and Boris Johnson was there. He met with a couple of them. Here he is. To urge an end to the violence. So this is on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. And he brought together the National Security Advisor for Burma, the Deputy Foreign Minister for Burma, and also ministers from Bangladesh, Indonesia, Turkey, Australia, Canada, Sweden, Denmark, and also Nikki Haley, who's the United States Ambassador to the UN Security Council. He's calling for an end to the violence against the Rohingya, and I wonder why. Well, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi receiving the butt of the criticism. Let's have a look at maybe why she might have. She met with China's President Xi in 2015 for the first time. They seem to get on very well. And then back in February, the Myanmar Times here pointing out that she has been strengthening her ties with the ASEAN countries and with China. Perhaps we get a clue as to why this Rohingya crisis, this issue is kicked off once again. Now, to discuss these issues, we're joined today by Gearoid Colmain, political analyst, political commentator. Welcome to the programme, Gearoid. Is Aung San Suu Kyi, has she fallen out with the British, or rather have the British fallen out with her? Is this part of the reason why we're seeing this kick off again?
Well, yes, they've certainly fallen out with her. I think the key question is what exactly is happening in northern Rakhine State, which is one of the states of the Union of Myanmar. The Western media and the human rights groups which are linked to the US State Department, I'm talking about Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International in particular, have accused the Burmese military of committing genocide. They are being accused of setting fire to villages, and by all accounts in the Western media, it seems to be the Burmese military who are committing mass murder. The other side of the story isn't being told. The Burmese military are denying these claims. They claim that the Islamic militants who attacked the country on the 25th of August are responsible for the violence, and that they are actually burning down villages and killing people, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus, and other ethnic minorities. The Asian Human Rights Centre has accused the UN of unlawful bias in their reporting on this. They have issued a statement asking for the special rapporteur from the United Nations to be fired, Professor Lee, and Professor Yang Lee, sorry. This has not been reported in the Western press either. The fact that there is another side to this story. There's significant evidence to back up the claims that the jihadists are actually setting fire to villages. If eyewitness reports count at all, and normally they do. I mean, in a court of law, an eyewitness report is significant. Maybe it may not constitute conclusive proof, but it is significant. You have to take it into account. You can't simply ignore eyewitness reports. The media are simply ignoring all of the eyewitness reports. I saw one report by the BBC where they were allowed work in Burma. They were, of course, accompanied by the authorities and so on. They were complaining about that. But then they just ignored the evidence presented to them by victims of the Rohingya militant violence. They simply ignored it. And this has been a pattern in pretty much all of the reporting I've seen, particularly since the communal violence of 2012.
So, I mean, the point here is that in the Western media, in the mainstream media, we're seeing stories about Rohingya children being beheaded. We're seeing civilians being burned alive, is how it's being described. And this is according to witness testimonies, according to the mainstream media, and they're blaming, as you say, the Burmese military and also paramilitary forces linked to the Burmese military. And in many ways, there are parallels to the stories that were coming out of Syria, particularly with regard to the sieges that were going on. The stories from the mainstream media were that it was President Assad's forces that were blockading and stopping food from getting into towns and villages throughout Syria, when in fact what was going on was that these towns and villages were being surrounded by insurgents and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so on, and they were stopping the food from getting in. It seems like there's the media narrative, there are parallels to be drawn here.
There are, because in Syria they said that the problem was the Shia versus the Sunni, and that it was a Shia regime or an Alawite regime which was dominating the country, and that was the basis of the conflict. And of course, it's a complete lie, because most of the Syrian soldiers are Sunni. And in this conflict in Myanmar, they're saying the same thing. It seems they're saying that it's between Muslims and Buddhists. And it isn't at all, because the Muslim organization, the all-religious organization of Islam in the country, have condemned the Rohingya terrorism and have made a statement in support of the military. They support the government. It should also be stated that half of the Muslim villages in the North Rakhine province haven't been affected by the violence. So, as Aung San Suu Kyi said in her speech yesterday, that needs to be taken into account. How come only certain amount of villages are affected, and how come it's not the entire Muslim community in Myanmar and in Rakhine? So that's another misrepresentation. Aung San Suu Kyi has described the media campaign or the behavior of the media as an iceberg of misinformation, and I think that's true. As I say, the other accounts have not been taken into consideration. The modus operandi of Al-Qaeda terrorists, the type of people we've seen in Syria, is to commit crimes and blame the crimes on the enemy. And they usually use children, because if you can murder a group of children, film it and put it online and say that the dictator or the regime you're targeting did it, it usually has a deep emotional impact on the public. Public will not, have the requisite knowledge to actually evaluate the information. They will simply see a child and then react emotionally. And that is a key feature of contemporary war propaganda. And the stories about the military throwing babies into fires and so on, they could be true. I have yet to see evidence that shows that, however. There is no evidence whatsoever for any of the claims.
But it is fair to say that the Burmese military, because this has been going on, this issue with the Rohingya has been going on for decades. And I mean, I think the first Rohingya migration took place in 1978. There were a couple in the 1990s. And over the years, in fact, this has pushed the Rohingya into the arms of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has been pushing money back in their direction. And in many cases, Rohingya have been finding themselves drawn into Wahhabist ideology. So this has been going on for a long time, and it is fair to say, isn't it, that the Burmese military don't like these people?
I'm not so sure if that's an accurate description, because first of all, the term Rohingya doesn't really make any sense. There is no ethnic group called Rohingya. These are Bengalis, Bengali Muslims who are living in Rakhine State in Myanmar, and their citizen status is the problem. There's a 1982 citizenship law in the country, and it's very difficult for the state to actually resolve this crisis for a number of reasons. It's extremely complex. First of all, the state doesn't recognize Rohingya as an ethnic group. And I think that's the correct position, because it's not an ethnic group. They are mostly Chittagonian speakers, dialect, which is a dialect of Bengali. They're Bengalis. They come from originally from Bangladesh. And so it is unfair and simply inaccurate to call them Rohingya. The term Rohingya was never really used. It has only become a term used by the lobbying groups in the last 10 years, and particularly since 2012. So that's something that the government doesn't recognize. And there's a lot of historians, and not just Burmese historians, but Western historians, who said the same thing, that this is nonsense. There's no such thing as a Rohingya. So the question is, who are they, and how do we resolve the crisis? There's no simple solution to that, because many of the migrants who came into the country left after the 1971 Bangladesh War of Independence, and were people that had sided with the Pakistanis in that, with West Pakistan, and are considered by the more secular authorities in Bangladesh as a threat, as a security threat, because of the influence of this Wahhabi ideology. So certainly the Burmese authorities historically are to blame for mismanagement of the crisis, but they shouldn't be given, and perhaps brutality. I mean, I'm not denying that at all, brutality of the military, but it's unfair to blame them for this entire crisis. It really is an intractable problem, and it will involve cooperation with many neighbouring states, in particular Bangladesh, but also India, in order to come up with a solution to this crisis.
Now, Boris Johnson has already said that the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development are going to start pumping millions of pounds into this problem. Do you think that's a positive development, or is this the first signs of a Syria-style intervention here?
It's more like Kosovo, because it's a similar. I think it's the long-term aim is Kosovization. The Union of Myanmar is a fragile state. It's got over 160 different ethnicities. It's got it has major insurgencies. I mean, this Rohingya crisis is very small in comparison to the other ethnic insurgencies the state has faced. And we don't hear much about them. The fact that the British and the Americans are now pumping more money into it means that we'll see an escalation of the crisis, and you'll see an escalation of calls for some kind of intervention. I think they will call for safe zones. That would be completely unacceptable. But if they can push the Islamist insurgency in the country, in other words, train more jihadists, send jihadists to the country. We're already seeing the beginning of that, where jihadists are being sent to the country. That may be already planned by the British, because we must remember that in 2009, the final stages of the planning for the war against Syria were being made in London. And that was confirmed by the former French foreign minister, because he met them, and he revealed that on French television, that the British government was planning to send in jihadists into Syria to take over the country. So that may be on the cards here, because a lot of the Islamist leaders are in London, and the Prime Minister of Bangladesh accused the British government of not doing enough to crack down on them recently. And I should also say that that government is going to have a very important election, general election next year. And the West does not want Bangladesh, the Awami League government. They supported the opposition, which is the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party. The Bangladeshi Nationalist Party, BNP, met with the leaders of Likud from Israel recently. So it's quite comical, and to hear people talking about some kind of a Zionist conspiracy against the Rohingya, when the Rohingya issue and the Rohingya narrative has actually been written by some organizations which are extremely Zionist in nature. I've already mentioned the Lowenstein International Rights Center of Yale University. They actually came up with the legalese to claim that genocide was being committed. And Lowenstein, if you look at his career, was an arch Israeli activist in the Carter administration. So this is there's a lot of the reporting, both within the mainstream and the alternative media, has been quite simplistic and misleading in this crisis, which is far more complex, multifaceted than people believe.
Okay, well, look, just to end this section, then you did mention that Aung San Suu Kyi has made a speech about this. She said, "I'm aware of the fact that the world's attention is focused on the situation in Rakhine State. As a responsible member of the Community of Nations, Myanmar does not fear international scrutiny." She said there have been allegations and counter-allegations. We have to make sure those allegations are based on solid evidence before we take action. And she said that she made the point that there's been no conflict since the 5th of September, that there have been no clearance operations. And just as a final point, it did sound like she was already making noises to permit some people to come back to the country, and they would be given protection when they arrive back.
Well, there's a verification process that they have in Myanmar. I haven't studied that verification process yet. I don't know what the criteria exactly are. How are they going to verify whether somebody qualifies as a Burmese citizen or not? But she has said that certain Islamist leaders are telling the communities not to cooperate with the Burmese authorities in the verification process. I don't think it's fair to say to any nation state that you have to accept everybody who arrives at your doorstep as a citizen. I don't think people who suddenly arrive in Britain or France get a passport. That's not realistic. So obviously you have to have some kind of verification process. And I think the media should focus in more on that. What exactly is it? And is it fair? And if people want to help Burma, then they should help them to resolve this crisis according to the rule of law and the laws of that country. And I believe every country has the right to formulate their own laws.
Gearoid, Colmain, thank you very much for joining us today. How do people find you online if they want to track you down?
Yeah, it's www.gearoidacolmain.org.
Okay.
So www.gearoidacolmain.org. And I have another article coming out today or tomorrow. So I'm covering this a lot at the moment because it is a very important issue, and it could develop into another Syria or another Kosovo, and that would be tragic for everybody.
Absolutely. Gearoid, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. Okay, let's move on. A little bit of an ad break here. Just a reminder that on Wednesday this week, the UK Column meeting in the George in Plympton, 7:30 p.m. if anybody wants to attend. And Brian, you're speaking at the AV 8.1, and actually Patrick Henningsen, who'll be joining us in a few minutes, is speaking at AV 8.1 as well on Sunday the 8th of October, 11 to 6 p.m, and that's in the Connaught Rooms in London. And then finally, to remind people that the next Media on Trial event is taking place. That's being run by Froome Stop War. It's taking place on Thursday, the 19th of October, in the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. And that's in Shaftesbury Avenue in London, and that begins at 7 p.m. John Pilger, Peter Ford, Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, Piers Robinson, Robert Stewart, Tim Hayward speaking. Proves undoubtedly be an excellent event.
Excellent event, and badly needed, of course.
Absolutely. Okay, let's welcome Patrick Henningsen to the programme. How are things, Pat? I can't hear you. You've got your mic muted.
Very well, thanks. Great to be with you, Mike. Thank you. Great to see you, Brian.
Yes, hello.
Good stuff. Well, we're going to start off with rioting pussies, Patrick, because I understand you were at the presentation given by a representative from Pussy Riot, her new book.
Yes. That isn't what the event was advertised at. This was at Goldsmith College last week. It was advertised as Russian state media and how to subvert it. That was how the event was marketed. And then when you arrived at the event, I was surprised to see it was actually a promotional event for the Pussy Riot founder, I guess, Maria Alyokina. Masha is her nickname, and this is her new book called Riot Days. And she was doing a reading of her book at the beginning of the event, and then they had a very, very brief Q&A afterwards. Not much talk about Russian media, although she said that they should take RT off the air. in the UK. She explicitly said that, but here she is. I think you've got a photo.
Well, we've got a short bit of we'll just play a couple of seconds of her reading.
Stored a locked room and returned us to the end of our terms when we are released. Masha, one woman, says me in a whisper while we're waiting tea in the kitchen.
Okay, well, I think we get the point there, Patrick.
It was embarrassing to watch. She was struggling to read the book. On at least 4 occasions, she had to ask her minder. He's a journalist named James Harkin. I believe he teaches at Goldsmith. I'm not sure, but how to pronounce various words. So clearly, she hadn't even read the manuscript in English of her book. If she did, she wouldn't have struggled so hard to read it. I mean, it was shocking. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And this was in front of a pretty much a full house. But what was even worse was the event was marketed as 1 p.m. until 3:30 p.m. and they shut it down promptly at 2 o'clock because the question and answers. There were some people asking some challenging questions to Maria.
What type of questions?
And, questions like, why did you desecrate a Christian church in Moscow, and what did you expect to gain from that? I was going to ask questions, but I was passed over by her handler, and he shut down the Q&A. I wanted to ask the question of, if Pussy Riot did that in Westminster Abbey, or in York Cathedral, or in St. Patrick's Cathedral, New York, in the bastions of free society, United States and Britain, what would they expect if they desecrated those holy sites? Or Jerusalem, or Italy? What would they expect? Would they expect to not be arrested? Would they not be sentenced? So clearly, why were they targeting the church in Moscow? Why not the state itself? But so she was trying to make the argument that they had a problem with the church's close proximity, the patriarchy, to the Kremlin, and that's why they did what they did. But it's amazing how they're propped up as these champions of free speech and freedom of expression. And then when you want to ask questions at this event, you were shut down, basically. So it was incredible.
As you say, it really wasn't about subverting Russian media with one minor comment? No,
it wasn't. They didn't comment much on that. I was looking forward to that part of the Q&A, but it never really arrived. And there was one gentleman who was there asking some really tough questions, and the moderator or her minder, James Harkin, he's a journalist, he shut him down forcefully and shouted him down. We recorded this exchange as well. We might put that out on 21st Century Wire a bit later. But in terms of the Center for Investigative Journalism, they were sponsoring the event. This is a sort of think tank that's run out of Goldsmith University, and they do training. And if this is the sort of thing that they're presenting to their students as sort of good journalistic practice, to shout down people in the Q&A, to shut down questions and answers because you don't like the questions that are coming, and to do an overtly politicized event that's basically demonizing the Russian government and the Russian leadership, then I can't really say that's a good example of journalistic principles coming from this well-funded, highly vaunted Center of Investigative Journalism at Goldsmith College. Pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah.
Patrick, very interesting report. I was fascinated while you were taking us through that, because at the back of my mind, I remember the college having an input into those early days of Common Purpose attempting to take control or trying to stir up angst for the government to take control of the media in this country. And it was a cell within Goldsmith University that was actually working alongside the Media Standards Trust. There was Hacked Off involved with this as well. And what they were doing, of course, was use the expression, stirring up angst against the press and the media in this country to help bring in this Lord Leveson inquiry. And of course, we've seen very clearly what he's been trying to do, which is to get further government control on the press. So astounding hypocrisy that Goldsmith should host Pussy Riot and be pointing a finger at the Russians, while behind the scenes they themselves have been working to help close down press freedom in UK.
Yeah, the whole purpose of the event is to kind of influence students to think negatively about Russia, about the Russian state, about RT, the Russian English language global media network, and then to sort of lionize and elevate the profile of this so-called band. I haven't heard any of their music. I don't know anybody who actually has, called Pussy Riot, who rose to prominence by doing a YouTube video desecrating a sacred Christian cathedral in Moscow. So that's, the long and the short of what this event was, and then promoting her book. So they get paid a lot of money to go around in speaking engagements, and this is how the money is laundered to keep this cause going through these book tours and speaking engagements, and it's foundation-funded money coming through foundations and trusts through the Center for Investigative Journalism, and then they're sponsoring this event, paying them large sums of money to go around and really propagandize on behalf of George Soros. And that's that area of interest, the Open Society Institute and so forth. Pussy Riot, very close to the Soros family. You can see in Society magazines them partying at Alex Soros's house in the Hamptons in Long Island, there with other millionaires and billionaires. So, and the Clinton Foundation, that sort of set as well, that liberal set in America is also championing this cause of Pussy Riot. So the thing is, in my opinion, it's a fraud from beginning to end. And watching her, she couldn't even read her own book. And it was so embarrassing. I would have pulled the plug if I was the organizer when I found out that she couldn't actually read, or she hadn't even read her own manuscript. And then she's stumbling through it for a painful half hour in front of a full house. It was shocking.
She did keep her clothes on, presumably.
Thank God for that.
Okay, well, look, we gotta move on quickly. Financial news now. Last week, we pointed out that the Bank of England is pushing hard on its new educational website, Knowledge Bank. It's been going for a number of months now. One of the articles it's been pushing in the last week or so is telling us how well the bank is doing at protecting us all from the next big financial crash. Nothing to worry about, they say. Quote, various reforms have taken place. The video below summarizes these changes from the amount of capital banks need to have to new rules and bankers pay. While there's much more work to be done, the video argues that the global financial system is today safer, simpler and fairer than it was a decade ago. So that's fantastic news. But as we pointed out just last week, the Adam Smith Institute had released a report saying, well, no, actually, it's not the case. The stress tests, which the Bank of England are promoting so hard, are about as well. This is the quote from the Adam Smith Institute. They're about as useful as a cancer test that cannot detect cancer. The quote goes on to say, they seek to demonstrate a financial resilience on the part of UK banks that simply isn't there. It's disturbing that 10 years on from Northern Rock, the best measure of leverage based on market values indicate that UK banks are even more leveraged than they were then. The biggest risk to the UK banking system now is the Bank of England's own complacency. That's true. Well, this report has now been followed up by two more reports. The first from Deutsche Bank here. Asset prices globally are the most elevated in history. Talking about stock market prices, this is what they had to say. Stock prices are certainly stretched relative to nominal GDP throughout history. We have seen more expensive prices, but they are approaching the peaks of 2000 and 2007, and they're in line with the most stretched valuations from the 1930s on this metric, and higher than the 1929 crash point. And they went on to highlight that they're concerned about a number of issues, including the fact that central banks might unwind quantitative easing, that the central banks only have what they describe as dangerous weapons left in the policy armory, They say that there'll be even more quantitative easing, quite possibly, and even longer negative interest rates. So that's a danger too, that there could be a crisis in Italy, there could be a crisis in China, there could be a crisis in Japan. They say that global trade imbalances could cause a crisis. They say that Brexit is going to be messy, and they're concerned that illiquid markets will stop functioning properly. So it's all positive stuff there from Deutsche Bank. And then the Bank for International Settlements has released its quarterly review, and it is particularly concerned about what it describes as zombie companies. And they're estimating something like 10% of European non-financial firms. So this is manufacturing companies, services companies, are zombie companies, and these are companies that have been taking advantage of low interest rates. In fact, have got themselves into the point where they require to borrow money on the low interest rates, and as soon as interest rates start to go up, basically they are going to start defaulting on the money that they've borrowed and that they need to continue to borrow. Ultra low rates, they say, have allowed these companies to keep operating in the event of a slowdown or an upward adjustment in interest rates. High debt service payments and default risk could pose challenges to corporates and thereby create headwinds for GDP growth. This is typical Bank for International Settlements language, but basically what they're saying, or what the overall picture here, Brian, is that the financial system is screwed, and so are corporations, because they're borrowing too much at low interest rates and not in a position to deal with even the smallest interest rate rise.
Well, it's a mess, Mike, isn't it, overall? And then we rely on the accountancy firms and insolvency practitioners. So we were very interested to see this story emerge. We've added a UK column titled "Sunshine on the Murky Waters of Insolvency." But this came out about 10 hours ago, and it's a very, very significant article, we think. It's a report that one of the senior men in Grant Thornton has been detained without charge in UAE. And what happened back in July was they took his passport after some form of complaint was made against him. Now, the paper doesn't know what the complaint was, we don't, but he's been stuck in UAE from that time. Grant Thornton says he's done absolutely nothing wrong. Apparently the Foreign and Commonwealth Office are trying to assist him, but at the moment he is, what do we say, almost under house arrest. He can work from a hotel, but that's it. If we look at some of the comments here, this man leads the team of insolvency practitioners and accountants specialising in the tracing and recovery of assets. And this man's involved in very, very big deals. And the meat of this story is around his work with tycoon Scott Young, very, very wealthy man, hundreds of millions, if not into the billion. Eventually becomes bankrupt. This man was a fixer for tycoons and so-called Russian oligarchs, but he died in 2014 in mysterious circumstances. He'd also been jailed in 2013 for refusing to reveal his finances in a divorce battle. And we know that his wife has been pursuing those assets very vigorously. Grant Thornton, this particular man, had been working with Mr. Young to do what? We're not quite sure, but of course this is all to do with money being moved around the country. So Foreign and Commonwealth Office giving assistance to this man, but UAE obviously uncertain as to what he's been up to. So this is the background story. The Telegraph here reporting Scott Young's inquest. He says was the former multimillionaire murdered by the Russian mafia, or did he commit suicide? This is the sort of meat of the controversy, because there's the suggestion that this man was murdered after falling out of a window of an apartment in London and unfortunately being impaled on the railings below. But he'd been supposedly depressed, and he had been in a psychiatric unit for a short period, so others were saying that he had become depressed and committed suicide, or possibly some sort of drunken accident. He was actually the fifth member of a tight circle of friends to have taken their own lives in the last 4 years. So that's a pretty amazing situation. And this is what the coroner had to say, that basically they couldn't really establish what had happened, but they didn't think there'd been any wrongdoing. And the police were adamant that there'd been no foul play. That was a theme the police constantly reiterated, but of course it's a theme that Mr. Young's wife in particular has consistently challenged, and it seems that there's a little bit of that dirty dealing around the London police in regard to investigating this particular case. So we've got huge amounts of money, we've got tycoons, we've got some maybe dodgy business dealings, we've got Grant Thornton, this man in there somewhere, a very fascinating company. It operates under the Grant Thornton brand, but it runs this very interesting organisation, Grant Thornton International Limited, which is a professional services network. It has its own global leadership team, all the language, Mike. But this is a non-practicing, not-for-profit, international umbrella organisation for its members. So it doesn't deliver its services itself, and they do it in their own name. But it's a huge conglomerate of companies under the Grant Thornton brands. Fascinating, this. So here we are, GTIL, Grant Thornton International Limited, member firms. It's not a worldwide partnership. And there's 2,500 of them, apparently.
Right.
But it's not a partnership.
Right.
And they employ about 47,500 people in over 130 countries. And one of the firms is, of course, Grant Thornton UK LLP. And what's the turnover of this big bunch? Well, it's 4.6 billion. So they're working together under an umbrella, but it's not a partnership. It's interesting. Now, it's transparent. We know that because Grant Thornton have said so in their Global Transparency Report 2017. Encourage people to go online and have a look at this document, read what the chief executive says. But we were just quite interested in this section on governance and management. If we come down here, this is the key bit. The Board of Governors is the principal and overriding authority in GTIL. The board exercises governance over GTIL and comprises the Chief Executive Officer of GTIL, the Chair of the Board, and managing partners from the largest Grant Thornton member firms, managing partners elected or appointed from other Grant Thornton member firms, but it's not a partnership. No, it's not a partnership.
I see.
And if you're confused, well, we can have a look at the next section. It says the chair of the board is a proactive role with a focus on ensuring that the board functions as a coordinated group in support of the CEO to deliver on global strategy.
Okay.
So I'm very confused by this. But I find it fascinating that when we look to big accountancy and insolvency firms to track down money in these huge global international deals, dirty deals, it all becomes a bit muddy.
So the guy in the UAE, he's working for one of these British non-partner firms?
Yeah, he's working for that, right. That British Grant Thornton UK Limited, which is part of that umbrella. But the key point is he was acting as insolvency practitioner, helping Mr. Young, who dies under extremely mysterious circumstances. And of course, one of the accusations of Mr. Young's wife is that he hid assets from her in the divorce proceedings, millions of pounds worth of assets, and there has been a criminal conspiracy through the agencies, through insolvency in the courts, in order to defraud her. That has not yet been proved, but that's the accusation made.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that one then. Okay, let's come to, well, Middle East, but British politics here, because as The Independent and a number of others have reported, the Labour Party has decided to ban Saudi Arabia and Sudan from its party conference, from the fringes of the party conference. As a result, the League of Arab States has cancelled the reception. They normally hold a reception of dinner and drinks for Labour Party members at the conference. And apparently this is because Jeremy Corbyn has decided that really enough is enough with regard to Yemen, and he doesn't want Saudi Arabia anywhere near the Labour Party conference. He's been calling for several months for the UK to stop selling arms to to Saudi, and he did so again yesterday when he was speaking to the BBC. He said, we're selling arms to Saudi Arabia. At the same time, we're sending aid in. We should not be doing either. Well, in fact, he said we should not be doing both. So maybe he thinks we should do one or the other, but I think we shouldn't be doing either. So that's an interesting development. But Patrick, perhaps an even more interesting development is this. Times of Israel reporting the first time in history that the US has now established a permanent military base in Israel. What do you think is going on here, and why now?
This is an extraordinary story, and you can tell how significant it is by the lack of mainstream media attention it's getting. So the United States putting a permanent military base in Israel, or technically in Palestine. And so this is going to be located in the Negev desert, not very far from the Dimona nuclear facility, in fact. And so the United States also has been supplying a number of operational items to Israel. The Iron Dome, the famous Iron Dome that Israel shows off on TV, that was installed and operated by U.S. military personnel. And so this is going to be this new base is, I think it's going to be run out of Stuttgart, Germany. So this is part of EUCOM, U.S. military's European command. And some of the statements made in the press junkets are shocking. I think one of the U.S. persons said that he realized that the importance of air defense was made clear during the 2004 Gaza war, when thousands of rockets were fired at Israel, as well as through assessments of threats we expect to face in the future. This is clearly propaganda for Israel. But what I think this is personally, I think this is very worrying. This tells me there could be maybe more war down the pipeline. This is a perfect casus belli, this base. It's a giant target, and it won't take much. One bottle rocket or Katyusha rocket, some other party favor, to drop in this, and it becomes an international incident. And the United States will then scramble whatever they want to scramble to sort of strike back. And so this, I don't think this is a good idea at all. This is on par with the disastrous proposal by the Trump administration to relocate the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. So clearly this is a provocative action, definitely in character with the radical Netanyahu government, which is fast becoming unhinged in Israel. And this looks like another desperate move. This is not good for the region. This is not good at all, this development.
Patrick, it was interesting to see online, just having a look online while you were talking, that Israel is claiming that they are that this base will operate under Israeli military directives. That's an interesting situation.
Yes, it's effectively like a base. They're calling it a base within a base. So it will be absolutely under Israeli control, but Israel is also in a way under U.S. control. It receives a $4 billion subsidy from the United States taxpayer every year to buy military equipment. So effectively, Israel is a welfare state, a welfare vassal outpost for the Anglo-American empire, essentially. So paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. So they're on the dole, basically. Their whole military operation is a welfare operation. So this maybe is the U.S. wanting to maybe take a little more leadership or control over the region, because it's absolutely been defeated, and it just got routed in Syria after 6 years of complete failure of the U.S. pumping billions of dollars, flooding the region with weapons, backing terrorist groups in order to achieve regime change and to break up Syria into little small pieces. Clearly that's failed. And so right now this could be very important in terms of the battle for the Golan Heights, which Israel's managed to steal a good chunk of that land, pure theft, by working with al-Nusra Front, positioning the terrorist forces on the ground in the Golan in such a way and get to drive out the UN peacekeepers basically erasing that armistice that's been in place since 1974. And so now you have the U.S. coming in as the big sort of bouncer, standing behind little Israel, basically saying, don't mess with Israel. We're here now. We've got a presence in the region. This is risky on so many levels. You can't even begin to analyze it.
Okay, Patrick, thank you very much for that. Well, I think we'll just end on that other nasty country, North Korea. Quite bizarre article here from the Daily Mail. Encourage people to go and read it. Beer Pyong. It says tourists reveal what it's like to go on a St. Patrick's Day pub crawl in North Korea's capital of Pyongyang, with lots of karaoke and £1.80 a pint. This article is utterly bizarre because basically what it demonstrates is that you have tourists from the West going and, I'm going to say loosely, having a good time or probably making a fool of themselves, drinking inside a country where drink is actually restricted. And then we're putting out photographs as if we're laughing at the North Koreans. But actually, this article makes me laugh at the West for putting out this appalling article which demonstrates nothing. Where's it come from? Well, it's come from this gentleman here, Michael Havis, I think is the right man. So we've got part of his Twitter page with 8,000 tweets and how many followers? 800. So that's a bit disappointing. But what is this about? And I think he's connected with this news agency here, and that's put out 6 tweets and it's got 61 followers. So I just got to put a big question over what is the purpose of this article. I think it's to try and make a mockery of North Korea, but in my mind it makes a complete mockery of the West.
Yes.
Yeah, just pitiful stuff. That's it for today. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you. And we'll say, if you like, to our viewers and listeners, if you like the news that we're putting out and you want to support, then please consider subscribing or making a subscription. UK Column can only do what it does with your help and your financial support. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.